Come now to the adjournment. Whip to move.
This House to now adjourn.
Question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Keith Baz.
Mr. Speaker, may I thank you for allowing this important debate on the crisis in the Mediterranean, which is a significant cause of anxiety for governments and people across Europe, as victims continue dying on a daily basis and countries such as Greece and Italy reach breaking point under the pressure. The figures are shocking. Over 100,000 refugees and migrants have crossed the Mediterranean from North Africa to mainland Europe in the last 23 weeks. The total figure for 2015 may reach 200,000. Of these, around 56,000 have reached Italy, 48,000 have arrived in Greece, 920 in Spain, and just under 100 in Malta. On the Greek island of Kos, 7,500 migrants have joined a population of just 30,000. Hundreds are now sleeping on the streets, struggling to access food and water. I will lay out 10 points in this speech, which I believe are necessary measures the United Kingdom should take to address this situation. I, of course, give way to the honourable gentleman.
I think the honourable gentleman will give way, and I've asked for his permission to intervene on them as well. My figures, I understand that the figures that have been given, they say that some 2,000 refugees have died in trying to get across the Mediterranean this past year, and those figures show an increase of 20 times what it was in 2014. Does the honourable gentleman feel it's time for Europe, the EU and the European countries to get together with those in North Africa and the Middle East to work together to address this issue? Because if they don't, it's going to be it's impossible for one single country to do it themselves.
I agree with the honourable gentleman from Strangford, and as I develop my speech, I think he will be pleased with the strategy that I set out. Now, he mentioned 2,000 dying in the last year. In fact, in the last 6 months, 1,725 people have drowned, making this perilous journey, and there must be others who have died in small unrecorded boats which have capsized. This figure is likely to exceed 3,000 by the end of this year. Often travelling in crafts which are completely unseaworthy, these innocent men, women and children pay up to €7,000 to make the journey to Libya. Your own distinguished chaplain, Mr. Speaker, the Reverend Rose Hudson Wilkin, made a passionate plea on the Daily Politics last week about this staggering humanitarian catastrophe on Europe's doorstep. But this is part of a much wider issue. In a report published by Amnesty just yesterday, the neglect of conflicts around the world has led to the worst displacement crisis since the Second World War. The report shows that millions of refugees, 4 million from Syria alone, have been condemned to a life of misery, and hundreds of thousands of people are trying to reach the EU for a better life. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate the member for this adjournment debate and for bringing this issue to the House. I'm wondering if the member agrees with me. Obviously, we're facing the worst refugee crisis since the war, as he rightly points out. Does he share my concern about the reports today about the withdrawal of HMS Bulwark from the Mediterranean theatre, and does he join me in thanking the service personnel who have done an absolutely phenomenal job in that theatre in very difficult circumstances?
I thank the honourable member for North East Fife. He's absolutely right. I pay tribute to the work that has been done by those who serve on Bulwark, and I will be coming to a specific point concerning what I hope the government will do when this project comes to an end on July the 5th. But the situation in Libya, Mr. Speaker, is a critical factor. Libya is a failed state, just over an hour and a half's flight time from Rome. Constant conflict between multiple factions have left it largely ungoverned. It has few ports and poor infrastructure. Yesterday I spoke to the Italian ambassador, Pasquale Terracino, who told me that 92% of migrants crossing the Mediterranean leave from Libya. The refugees travelling from Libya largely consist of victims of war and conflict in Afghanistan, Syria, Eritrea, Nigeria and Somalia. Last Monday, in Schloss El Moor, leaders of the G7 called upon Libya's leaders to form a government of national accord. However, calling for a political solution is not enough, and the reconciliation process faces numerous obstacles. We urgently need to support the UN mission to bring parties in Libya to the conference table. One obstacle is the prevalence of criminal gangs in Libya, who play a large part in trafficking migrants from their points of origin into the Mediterranean. These vicious groups have made millions on the back of the drowned victims. Over the last Christmas period alone, traffickers made an estimated €3 million packing between 300 and 400 people onto old, doomed ships, on some occasions forcing them onto the vessels at gunpoint. This was demonstrated vividly on the 2nd of January, when 360 Syrian refugees, including 70 children, were rescued after the Ezzedine, a livestock freighter, was left adrift in freezing conditions. Some of the groups profiting from this situation include international terrorist organisations such as ISIS, who recently captured territory in the city of Sirte. Intelligence from Italy shows that trafficking has become a significant revenue stream for terrorist organisations to fund their activities. Terminating these trafficking rings is absolutely vital. Will the Minister give us an assurance that the government is providing practical support to train Libyan security forces, to disarm the militias and to re-establish the rule of law? Many of our EU partners also believe that direct military action against the trafficking rings is necessary. The current plans, Mr. Speaker, are stalled within the UN Security Council as the remnants of the Libyan government has rejected proposals to take military action within Libyan territorial waters. However, there is no obstacle to taking firmer action in international waters under the EU's common security and defence policy. The Italian government believes such an operation would be similar to the international action against Somali pirates, and they are right. The government should provide direct support for more aggressive measures against the traffickers in international waters. The Khartoum process, a commitment between the EU, North African countries and countries in the Horn of Africa to cooperate in tackling people trafficking, appears to have had very little impact. The project is watered down and a very slow solution to a critical problem. We need an inclusive process which includes all those parties, but it needs to be tougher, as the Honourable Member for Strangford has just said. Countries like Tunisia and Algeria have to be vested with greater authority and resources to deal with this problem. The Tunisian ambassador, Nabil Amar, has provided me with information showing that their security forces have stopped 191 illegal migration attempts this year, detaining a total of 1,265 people. They cannot maintain these efforts without our support. What we need is a permanent task force meeting on a 24/7 basis with the authority to work with Frontex to replace the Khartoum process entirely. It must include the key North African and Southern Mediterranean countries. Through this task force or otherwise, we must ensure our North African neighbours receive adequate resources as they bear an increasingly significant humanitarian and security problem. To relieve the stress on Italian, Greek and Spanish authorities, Dimitris Avramopoulos, the EU Commissioner for Home Affairs, has called for migration centres to be established in Tunisia and Egypt. These centres would allow migrants to make asylum applications which are processed remotely outside of Europe, preventing them from risking their lives in the Mediterranean. The government should review its current position against these centres, which present a legal alternative to refugees risking their lives in the Mediterranean. Of course, I give way to Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my right honourable friend is making an absolutely vital and important speech. I would just ask him if he would agree with me that they must especially consider child migrants who are particularly vulnerable.
Can I commend the Honourable Lady for, at last week's business questions, calling for a debate on this subject, and I'm glad we're able to have the debate today. Yes, we must take special care of the children who are put at risk because of what is happening in the Mediterranean. She's absolutely right. Operation Triton is the Frontex rescue mission which replaced Mare Nostrum. It has failed to live up to expectations. Operating at a third of the budget of Mare Nostrum, which saved 150,000 people in 2014, Triton was clearly overstretched as the numbers of migrants making the journey to Italy increased by 30%. Sadly and predictably, deaths rose under Triton by 9 times in the period leading up to May. This was tragically demonstrated from the 16th to the 20th of April, when 5 ships containing around 2,000 migrants sank. 1,200 people, including children, died. Triton's resources were simply unable to cope with such a tragedy. The subsequent emergency summit on the 23rd of April tripled Triton's budget to €120 million and expanded its patrol area. Better late than never, Federico Fossi of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees believes this increase in resources has demonstrated results, and 6,000 people were rescued between the 6th and 7th of June. Before the emergency summit, aid organisations feared the death toll would otherwise reach the tens of thousands. As the Honourable Member for North East Fife said, I want to join him and others in commending the British Government for dispatching HMS Bulwark to the area and our servicemen and women who have been performing heroic tasks. Can the Minister today confirm that when Bulwark's tour of duty ends on the 5th of July, it will be adequately replaced by an equivalent mission? We must ensure that the rescue mission maintains these improved resources and learn our lessons that we simply cannot manage this problem with a small and poorly financed operation. One proposed solution to this problem is quotas, which the Home Secretary discussed today with her EU counterparts in Luxembourg. However, as currently envisaged, quotas would be beset with complications, as any formal announcement may be the green light to the traffickers to send more ships. Particularly whilst these gangs are operating, mandatory resettlement will not completely solve the problem, a position held by France and Spain. But it is clear to me that burden sharing between Schengen countries is on the agenda.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and I endorse all what he said. Does he recall the urgent question in the closing stages of the last Parliament, when the government was warned that any change in the sea rescue mission would endanger lives? And is it not absolutely vital that every effort is always made to rescue people, whatever may be the result of their application for refugee status? The rescue of human beings must be the first priority of any civilised society.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This should be the first priority. We should try and make arrangements to stop the boats leaving in the first place, but once they are out in the Mediterranean, we have a duty to do this. I give way to the Honourable Member for Glasgow.
Well, it was just on the question of quotas in the Schengen area. Does he not agree, irrespective of hard and fast numbers, it's vitally important that the United Kingdom takes its fair share of people who are seeking refuge from North Africa?
For Glasgow, at the end of the day, I think we're going to have to do that anyway, because once the migrants get to Calais, as I will say in my speech, it is too late by then. So we have to be part of the solution to this problem. Whilst quotas are not the complete answer, we do have to work on this as a solution. The resources and political capital required to address migration into Europe cannot only come from the affected countries. Italy and Greece have been warning us of this problem for years, and Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi has described the EU's response as being largely insufficient. He was being polite. Coping with thousands of people in places such as Lampedusa, Italy and Greece, which are under severe strain, is a major problem. The crisis is costing the Italian government around €800 million a year, and the EU only contributes €60 million in assistance. Today, the Italian government shocked the EU by threatening to shred Schengen and asking and stating that they would consider sending migrants to other EU countries without their government's permission. They have given the EU a wake-up call. The pressure is simply too much for Italy and Greece to handle. The Prime Minister is meeting Prime Minister Renzi in Milan tomorrow. This issue must be top of the agenda in Anglo-Italian relations. If nothing else, the government should provide deeper assistance. The EU could use its diplomatic strength to assist in the repatriation of individuals to places like Mali and Senegal, which is currently a major challenge. Repatriation agreements are more effective if arranged by the EU rather than bilaterally. Secretary.
I commend the member for organising this debate. Could I put it to him? There are actually two interlinked refugee crises, and that the Syrian crisis is slightly different in the sense that it involves a major political crisis, not necessarily economic migration, and therefore there is a necessity for Europe and Britain in particular to take a mandatory quota of Syrian refugees.
I think he's right, and there is an obligation for us to do so, and perhaps when the Minister comes to wind up, he will tell the House what are the current numbers of Syrian refugees that we have taken, because we have, of course, agreed to do this. So it would be good to have an update on what that figure is.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
On that very point, as well as commending my honourable friend for Leicester East on bringing this matter to the attention of the House, I would like to point out and ask the Government to comment on the fact that in the UK only 187 people have been resettled under the Syrian resettlement programme in this country. 187, compared with, in Germany, 30,000. Compared with in 8,000 even in Norway. I think whether or not we have a mandate of quotas, just the sheer number 187 is something which we should all be ashamed of as a country, and there must surely be grounds for a full debate in the House on this matter so that we can settle at least or progress the idea of whether or not quotas are a pull factor or they just provide safety which is so badly needed.
I say to my honourable friend for Bristol West, congratulate her on her election. I think she started that debate tonight. And I'm sure Mr. Speaker has heard what she's had to say. I think it's very important that we debate what has been happening in Syria and the numbers that we have taken, and to get a proper update from the government on this very point. Mr. Speaker, there is one final point for this House to consider. We must review the implications of our foreign policy far more carefully. We cannot intervene in third world countries with no post-conflict development strategy. We will only create more chaos, as we have done in Libya. Moving forward, we can tinker with where and how asylum and immigration cases are processed, but stabilising the political and security situation in North Africa and the conflict zones is the only long-term solution. We also need to contribute to the economic development of North African and Sub-Saharan African countries. When people are prepared to risk their lives, literally to die for a better life, we cannot sit by and hope the processes of the European Union will solve the problem. They won't. This Mediterranean madness has only one winner. The criminal gangs which make money, everyone else loses. The desperate migrants in Lampedusa cause Greece and Spain, the overstretched authorities and residents on the EU southern border, and the thousands of victims who have died in the Mediterranean, which has now become the graveyard of Europe. Nero fiddled whilst Rome burned, and the EU has held summits whilst people are drowning, and the countries of the Maghreb and southern Europe are being overwhelmed. To fail to act now could result in one of the great betrayals of history.
The Minister of State at the Home Office, James Brokenshire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And at the outset, I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for securing a debate on this very important issue. I know from his experience of being the chair of the Select Committee in the last Parliament, the detail that he has, the visits that I know that he has undertaken to Calais to see the situation for himself, for example, in Greece on the Greek border, and therefore the pressures that migration creates in a number of different countries. And therefore, I certainly have listened carefully to the various points that he has raised, and therefore, in the time available to me, I will try to respond to the issues that he has highlighted. Certainly, he has underlined, I think, in very clear terms, that the situation in the Mediterranean is a tragic reminder of the risks migrants are prepared to take when attempting to make the perilous journey to reach Europe. And I think also, and a point he made very clearly, a stark reminder of the exploitation by traffickers and organised criminal gangs who so callously put people in harm's way at sea. Frankly, they could not care whether people live or die. And I think it is that callousness, that coldness, that complete disregard for human life that we need to focus on, and the traffickers who are responsible for that. The loss of life is unacceptable, and I know the whole House is in absolute agreement on that. Mass migration is one of the key global issues of our times. And to perhaps put this in context as to the challenge that we face, it is currently estimated that there are around 500,000 people in Libya awaiting the opportunity to cross the Mediterranean. There are no easy answers, and none of us should pretend otherwise. But what we do need to do is to look beyond the horizon, to look to the source and transit countries, to look at an end-to-end process in dealing with this significant issue, but also in equally dealing with the here and now. The UK is playing a leading role in the rescue efforts to prevent further deaths. We have sent the Royal Navy's flagship, HMS Bulwark, to assist the Italian-led search and rescue mission. We've also deployed 2 UK Border Force cutters and 3 Merlin helicopters, in addition to police and military expertise. And to date, UK assets have saved over 3,000 lives. On the issue of HMS Bulwark's deployment, no definitive dates have been set for its withdrawal, but I can assure the House that all options are being actively considered. We will continue to work with European partners to solve the immediate crisis, but these efforts alone will not make the problems go away. We do need to treat the root causes and not just deal with the consequences. This can only be done with a comprehensive long-term solution, one where we break the link between the people getting on the boats and achieving residence in Europe. I think that this is absolutely key to the solution, something that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have underlined in their contributions, because it is through breaking this link that I think that we will stop people putting themselves in the perilous position that they are in seeking to make that journey across the Mediterranean. I can see the Honourable Gentleman is wishing to perhaps catch my eye. I'm conscious of time, but so perhaps I will give way one.
I'd like to thank the Minister for giving way. On a short point, he said that on the withdrawal from HMS Bulwark, all options are being considered. Will the Minister confirm to us that, regardless of what happens, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs will come back and make a full statement to this House?
Hear, hear.
Well, certainly I'm sure that the House will be kept updated in a number of different ways in terms of the ongoing operations that we see in the Mediterranean. But as I've underlined, we obviously are making that difference now with the deployment of assets in the Mediterranean, and we are keeping this under active review in terms of that deployment. But we do need to build stability in Libya and source countries, helping to create livelihoods and reducing the push factors to prevent the flow of people from these countries. We need to make it clear that illegal migrants who are not in genuine need of protection will swiftly be returned to their home countries. And we need to tackle the large organised crime gangs and trafficking networks who facilitate and profit from this human misery. The increased flow of migrants has resulted in a range of pressures across Europe. Asylum numbers have increased significantly in a number of countries, in Germany, for example, and as the Right Honourable Gentleman has highlighted, Calais has become an obvious visible sign of migratory pressures close to the UK. Recognising that we needed to do more with our French counterparts to tackle that issue, the Home Secretary and French Interior Minister Bernard Cazeneuve set out a number of commitments in a joint declaration on the 20th of September 2014 to tackle problems at the port of Calais. This included £12 million from the UK government towards upgrading the port infrastructure at Calais and other juxtaposed ports, and improving security and upgrading technology. I can tell the House that we have made good progress in the implementation of these practical solutions, including the first phase of installing new security fencing and a communications campaign where we have obtained valuable intelligence and insights from migrants. And we continue to work closely with the haulage industry, both in the UK and abroad, to ensure drivers and hauliers are aware of what steps they need to take to secure their vehicles in order to reduce clandestine entry into the UK, but also listening to the hauliers, listening to their experiences. And I spoke to the Road Haulage Association and the Freight Transport Association last week, and intend to have further discussions in terms of some of those immediate challenges that the industry faces. But we recognise that the problem does not begin in Calais. That is why we are enhancing joint work with France and other European partners to clamp down on the organised crime groups behind people smuggling. We welcome some of the EU's proposals and are working with other member states to deal with illegal migration. But we have already made our position clear on the proposals for relocation of migrants within the EU. We need to find a long-term solution to the problem that does not increase the pull factors to the EU. The UK government is clear that it will offer generous funding and practical support to make that happen. At the European level, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is in Luxembourg today for the Justice and Home Affairs Council meeting, and that includes a strong focus on illegal mass migration. And my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, will attend the European Council meeting in Brussels next week, when no doubt this issue will be focused upon heavily. So, firstly, we are taking action against the criminal gangs. We are working closely with Europol to strengthen its operation to tackle organised crime groups involved in smuggling in the Mediterranean Sea, focusing on tracking vessels and bringing together intelligence. It is through that fusion of intelligence through all sources that I think we will have the best possible picture to take action against the trafficking gangs and indeed those vessels that may be being used to try to transit people across the Mediterranean. The UK is taking further action as part of a core group of EU member states and African partners leading the EU Khartoum process, which is a combination of work between EU member states and African Union states, looking upstream, looking at those source and transit countries, and also the people traffickers involved. This Horn of Africa initiative focuses on combating people smuggling and trafficking in that region. It will bolster sustainable regional protection for refugees by working with key countries of origin, including Eritrea, Ethiopia and Somalia, and transit countries such as Libya and Egypt. The UK has also been at the forefront of efforts to secure a Security Council resolution to authorise the use of force against smugglers' vessels. As the Right Honourable Gentleman has highlighted, the Common Security and Defence Policy Initiative is work that is being taken forward, and it is important that we have that intelligence fusion to inform that work. But in the longer term, stability and regional development are the only sustainable solution. This is why the UK prioritises aid, and our unprecedented programme helps those who are displaced by war and reduces people's need to flee. We have one of the most generous aid budgets in the world and are one of very few EU countries to spend 0.7% of GDP on aid and development. The UK is the second largest bilateral donor to the Syrian crisis, providing £800 million to date. And we are heavily involved in efforts to help establish a sustainable unity government in Libya. We are also supporting the EU's proposals for sustainable protection in North and East Africa under EU regional development and protection programmes, and we are already participating in the Middle East programme. We're increasing our support and protection for those who need it. We had reference to children earlier in this debate, and the UK Syrian Vulnerable Persons Relocation Scheme was launched in January 2014 to provide protection, including torture survivors and women and children at risk who cannot be supported effectively in their region of origin. 187 have been resettled in the UK in just over a year, and more arrive each month. And we have granted asylum to over 4,000 Syrians since the start of the humanitarian crisis there. The UK has settled over 6,000 refugees over the past 10 years in direct cooperation with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees under the Gateway Programme. Practical action at both EU level and more widely is what we need to save lives, to tackle the criminal gangs, to find a solution to the chaos in Libya, and to offer long-term solutions to enable people to stay in their own countries in peace and dignity. That is what we are focused on. This is a broad piece of work, and this government is focused on its responsibilities, working with EU partners to deal with this significant problem.
Order. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as other people say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
House of Commons sound. 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 House of Commons sound.